Guilty pleasure reading. I know.
Okay, the Kristen Stewart.
Twilight.
I read them in less than a week. I thought that they were kind of hot. And then I read it and I was like, this is like a week and a half of my life I can't get back. But I loved those books when I read them.
I am here with Viola Davis for Open Book. Thank you so much for chatting all things books with me. I read that when you were growing up in Rhode Island, that books were a refuge for you.
It was a refuge. It was an escape into my imagination where I could be anyone I wanted to be and I could go anywhere I wanted to go. So I went to the library. Every day I would walk. When I was in kindergarten, I would walk to the library and I'd stay there until nighttime and I would walk home.
I also read that Elise, the trusted librarian, was like a friend, was like a mentor.
Well, she was a friend because it was almost like Pavlov's dog. As soon as I got there, she would give me half of her lunch, which was always a tuna fish sandwich and a brownie. And I would devour it, and then I would go into the children's section of the library.
When you think back to being in that children's section, what books do you remember reading?
Everything from Dr. Seuss. Everything from the corduroy books. I mean, I remember the smell of the pages.
Was there a favorite when you were little or something that you remember reading and just thinking, or even maybe an adolescent thinking like, wow, now this?
The first book I ever read that changed my life was Claude Brown's Man-Child in the Promised Land. I think I read it when I was 13 and I could not believe it. It was a memoir about this African-American man growing up in Harlem and the whole drug crisis, you know, in the 20s, and just, it shifted me as a person. That's what it did. It shifted me as a person.
How important is it that kids or teens can see themselves, can see their culture, can see somebody that looks like them in the books that they read?
You know, it's like Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Because I think that sometimes a culture can limit you in your identity as a woman of color, and it's only in books and it's only in stimulating your imagination that sometimes you can see your possibilities, you know, and also it's just entertaining. You know, I just feel like it's entertaining. That's why I became an actor. That's why I love acting.
You like to entertain.
Yes, and I like pretending I'm somebody else.
You said earlier when we were chatting that plays were like this opening into this world that you would eventually go into.
I'm an introvert. I'm actually very shy, even though I always tell people I'm a whole lot more fun than you think I am. You have a lot of laughs.
I think I would have fun.
But I'm very, very introverted, and so I used to love holing up in my house reading plays. I would read Eugene O'Neill. Even as a young teenager, Shakespeare, Winter's Tale is my favorite. Macbeth. And I would read, you know, all things August Wilson, you know, Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller absolutely just shifted me in a whole way with Death of a Salesman, View from the Bridge. I consider that to be, you know, they call it dramatic literature. And I would pretend to be all of those characters in it. And yeah.
It was the foreshadowing into your career.
Yeah, now I'm like, when am I gonna retire? I'm tired.
You're like, I don't even have time to read the new J.K.
I got an 8-year-old.
What do you read to your daughter? What do you read to her?
You know what? I read now. My husband gave me a book for our anniversary, and they're all love poems by Emily Dickinson, Pablo Neruda.
Those are romantic.
And they're all romantic. And so we read those together. And how I get her to read it is I say, okay, say the name of the author, Genesis, but do it nonsensical. Just make believe. So she'll go, Pablo, Pinky Brains or something. I say, okay, read his poem. And then she reads me his poem. That's how I get her to read it, by making it fun, by making it like silly. You know, silly. And she reads me some of the greatest love poems, especially before we go to sleep. So that's...
Is that like a love poem in itself? You're sitting with your daughter reading love poetry? Are you like, this is what life is supposed to be like?
Yes, except when I go, Genesis, do you know how powerful that is? Mommy is crying right now. She's like, okay, Mommy, whatever. It's Pablo Neruda, Genesis.
If you could make any book into a movie, what would it be?
It's, and I'm not trying to push my production company, GB Productions, me and my husband's, but Wildseed, Octavia Butler, who's probably the greatest science fiction writer ever. She's passed since, but African-American woman, she's written a series of books, but Wildseed is a story of a woman who's a shapeshifter who's lived for over 300 years, and her partnership with a man who's lived over 2,000 years, and how they come together to change the world. Oh my God.
Well, does this mean it's happening? Could be happening?
Oh, it is happening.
Yes.
We're developing it now. That is the book. When I was in my 20s, I said, that's the book. That's the book that speaks to me. That's the book I want to see as a movie. I have a vision of creating narratives with people of color in them that shows them in a light that they've never been seen. That's why I read. That's why I feel like that's my legacy. And that's the book.
Telling a different story.
Absolutely.